The basic concepts of democracy! The first concept of democracy is the recognition of the fundamental worth and dignity of every person. Democracy is based on the belief that every individual is important. No matter what their position in life may be, they should be treated as a separate and distinct being. The concept of dignity and worth is critical in the perspective of a democratic community. In 1865, William Booth, a preacher of Christianity, founded the Christian Mission, currently known as Salvation Army. It was called the Christian Mission because Booth and his followers were determined to spread the word of Christ. Thieves, prostitutes, gamblers, and drunks were among the first Booth converted to Christianity. The modern-day charity organization, Salvation Army, provides services such as rehabilitation centers, schools, hospitals, and medical centers, as well as nearly 16,000 church and community centers. The work of the Salvation Army is funded through donations from its members, the general public, and, where appropriate, local authority and government grants. The government's support with Salvation Army recognizes the fundamental worth and dignity of every person by offering opportunities to people of lower economic backgrounds, encouraging their participation in society as a dignified individual.
After being appointed Chancellor of Germany in 1933, Hitler's ideas for war against the Jewish population picked up pace. Jews were banished from careers involving government and from enrolling in universities. Jews' shops were boycotted, and in 1935, the Nuremberg Laws were passed clarifying German Jews as subjects instead of citizens. Intermarriage was outlawed, and a number of more severe harassments toward the Jews evolved to the point of murder. All of these horrifying laws and actions held by Hitler's reign undeniably failed to recognize the fundamental worth of every person by stripping the Jews' population of their natural rights and dignity. Another concept of democracy is that all men are created equal, as stated by Thomas Jefferson. Branching from that statement, each person must have the right to extend himself or herself entirely. Also, the law should permit each person to be treated as equal to the next.
After several generations of agitation and protest for women's right to vote, suffragists finally paved the way for change. In 1919, the 19th Amendment to the United States Constitution was ratified, stating, "The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by and state on account of sex. Congress shall have power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation." This amendment granted the equality of sexes in which women had been fighting for. In Montgomery, Alabama, during the 1950s, many rules and regulations permitted segregation laws. Among these regulations were laws concerning the city bus system. Blacks riding the bus would have to pay fare to the bus driver at the front of the bus, and then step off and re-enter through the rear entrance to sit in the back. Only whites were allowed to sit in the front, and if there was not enough room, blacks would have to give up their seats to accommodate for them. On December 1st, 1955, Rosa Parks refused the order to give her seat to a white person. This decision resulted in trial that lasted 30 minutes, and Parks was ordered to pay a fine. The city-wide bus system, the authorities in charge of Parks' trial, and all other aspects of segregation in the South contradicted the concept of democracy to respect the equality of all persons. Black men, women, and children were degraded at this time and were not treated as equal members of society.
The third basic concept of democracy is that the will of the people will determine the public policy. This idea is based on the fact that the majority will be right more than it will be wrong. However, the minority shall be allowed to present its arguments, criticisms, and suggestions.
The concept of having a mosque built near Ground Zero, where terrorists of Islam descent destroyed the World Trade Center, along with hundreds of lives, brought immediate controversy. However, after carefully acknowledging the situation at hand, the United States government successfully held their grounds of insisting on minority rights by allowing the place of worship to be built. President of the Islamic Leadership Council of Metropolitan New York, Imam al-Amin Abdul Latif, stated that the 55 mosques and Islamic organizations in New York City that stand against the racism, hatred, religious intolerance, and ethnic bigotry directed against Islam and American Muslims. In this situation, Islam is a minority religion in the United States. Therefore, by allowing the place of worship near Ground Zero, the United States followed the concept to insist upon minority rights.
The democratic concept to have faith in the majority rule, but to insist upon minority rights, was ignored when two Hungarian professors, Peter Hans and Lethel, were fired from their jobs at Babis Bolyai University in December of 2006. They were expelled for putting corresponding Hungarian captions underneath Romanian language signs at the institution, which happens to be multicultural. The university officials started to allow bilingual signs to be placed around the universities for 11 months before. The university didn't say anything or do anything until the professors had agreed to leave the institution. This situation is an example of how governments ignore the concept to insist and listen to the minority rights by not letting a multicultural facility to place the minority language underneath the majority's inscriptions. The fourth concept of a democratic government is to combine and adjust opposing views and interests. Remembering the first two basic concepts of democracy, recognizing personal worth and dignity, and respecting the equality of all persons, the only way to make public decisions suitable to the many different opinions and interests is by compromise.
After the Mexican-American War, the United States gained a great deal of land. Consequently, slavery issues arose. Southerners wanted the new territory to be slave territories, while the Northerners wanted it to be free from slavery. The findings of gold in California around this time led much of the population to the West Coast, adding another state to the Union. In turn, the country began arguing whether that territory should allow slavery or not as well. As an effort to resolve the competing views, Senator Henry Clay proposed the Compromise of 1850, a series of 5 laws. California would enter the Union as a free state. The rest of the Mexican cession would be divided into New Mexico and Utah, in which popular sovereignty would determine the slavery status. Texas would give up its land claim west of the Rio Grande in exchange for financial assistances. Slave trade, but not slavery, would be abolished in the nation's capital. The old fugitive slave law would be replaced with a new, more effective one. The government followed the concept of a successful democracy by compromising the issue of free territories versus slave territories. Though neither side received all of the territory, the compromise was able to achieve an agreement over the majority of the people.
Though the compromise in 1850 followed the concept of democracy and delayed the extremities of war between the United States temporarily, the North and the South could not ultimately put aside their contrasting views. Over the next few years, several compromises were suggested, but neither side was willing to budge. This inevitably led to the Civil War, as the 11 South states declared secession from the United States. The fifth concept of democracy is insistence upon the widest possible degree of individual freedom.
The First Amendment of the United States Constitution grants citizens the freedom of speech. This allows all people in the United States the right to say whatever they want, even if the government does not agree with it. Authors and inventors have the right to publish their works and discoveries for all to see, and the Internet grants almost everyone the ability to communicate their ideas to wide audiences. These are all examples of ways that people are allowed their individual freedom. Freedom of speech fits the concept of the widest possible degree of individual freedom because all American citizens are allowed to communicate their opinions on any topic they choose, as long as they do not threaten the safety of another person.
In 1869, Native American children as young as 5 years old were taken from their families by church officials, missionaries, and local authorities to be shipped to Christian boarding schools. Officials forbid these children from practicing their own religion and cultural ways of life. Virtually imprisoned in the schools, children experience a variety of abuses, from forced assimilation to widespread sexual and physical abuse. Ulysses Grant's peace policy ignored the concept of democracy, stating that every individual should have freedom of their individual rights. The Native Americans were not allowed to practice their religion of choice and were forced into a lifestyle that they did not desire.
The basic concepts of democracy! Hope you enjoyed the show!